we were told to cut off the 2 legs and just take the legs to the game warden. So I got a bunch of magpies and wanted my reward and bounty. So I called the game warden, Mr. Bronson, and told him that I had my magpies and that I wanted to know the instruction on getting paid and how I got the legs to him. And he said, are you Ivan Andrus's son? And I said, yes. And he said, I know Ivan Andrus, and I know that he's an honest man, and I assume that he would teach his son the same. You tell me how many magpies you've got, and I will send a check to you. Your family's reputation, that taught me my family's reputation was as good as gold. Another example of that, just here recently, a couple of years ago, we were trying to decide what burial spots in the Marion Cemetery that our family was going to have. My father, I think it was 16 burial spots in the cemetery that he bought early on. I can't remember now, he paid $6 or $7 or $8 for the total. But there was some discussion on who was going to own the last 2 or 3, and we needed to make that decision with our group here while we were still alive, because if we were not here then, it had to go through everybody in the whole family and extended family had to sign something. So the sexton told me, when your family decides what you want to do, if you will take that, write it down, and take it to a notary and get it stamped and notarized, then that will be okay. But then he said, well, no, with you and your family, you just give me your word. That was a compliment to the reputation of our family in the community. I'm so grateful, as other members have said, for the great parents we had. And I'm going to turn the time over to Ken for some comments. When he's through, if any of you want to make some comments, why do so. Take the microphone.
Before I get into talking about family, I'm going to deviate somewhat. In our Pocatello temple, it's been open for a couple of years. When you go in the chapel, facing you, at the end of the chapel, looking at you, is not stainless, stained glass, I guess you call it a mural of the Savior. It is absolutely beautiful. I don't know what it's worth or where the church got it, but it is, I've never seen one like it. It is very, very special. Beautiful. It's probably 8 or 10 feet high and 10 or 12 feet wide. The Savior's right in the center of it. He's standing there. In this hand, he has a shepherd's crook that's just taller than him with the crook on it. And on his right side, swallow it. On his right side, he's cradling a lamb in his arm, and the mother of the sheep is standing to his right next to him, looking up at her lamb. Now, I've looked at that mural several times, and I studied the sheep. It's not a likeness of a sheep, but it's a very good representation. So we went to the temple 6 months or so ago. And my chin. What if I need to wipe my nose? So, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So we went to Colleen and I went to the temple a few months ago, and the sheep is now on the left side of the Savior looking up. And I pointed that out to Colleen later after we left the session. She said, "No, you're confused." And I said, "I am not confused, but how it couldn't be changed. It could not be changed. How could the sheep change from this side of the Savior to this side of the Savior?" So I talked to 2 or 3 other people about it, and they said, you can't change it. You were wrong in the first place. I said, I know I saw what I saw. And the sheep was on this side of the Savior, looking at us. The Savior's eyes followed you everywhere in the room. So, before they loaded me up and hauled me off to the insane asylum, my brother-in-law, Lena's husband, came home one day, and he'd been talking to his father, who was a temple worker. And he said, "Ken, you're not crazy." And that was a big relief. He said that you can't hear me? Oh my gosh. Okay, well, why don't you tape it to me? I'll try. I'll try. I'll really try. So the temple had found out that the mural was backwards, and so they turned it around. So I've redeemed myself from the insane asylum for at least a while. I'm going to sit down. Yeah.
Still put it in front of his chin now.
So I wanted to share that with you before I got into family things. What has been said about integrity and honesty in our family has made a big impression on me. As some of you know, most of you know, we've taken some people into our home for a short period of time that needed to get away from their own home. And some of them didn't have a very good reputation. And I said to them, we have 2 rules in our home. But I should have said this before. If you need to smoke, if you have to smoke, please don't do it in front of our children. But if you have to smoke, do what you have to do. But we have 2 rules in our house, in our family. We do not steal from each other, and we do not lie to each other. And will you adhere to these 2 rules? And they, of course, they always say yes. Okay. Somewhat has been said about John and Margie marrying each other. I was a young boy when they were, I guess you would call it dating, but in their premarital get-togethers on the ranch and on the farm. Boy, that was an education. It was so new to me, but it was very enjoyable and impressionable. Okay, I'm going to tell things as I remember them. They may not be very interesting to you, but they were very impressionable to Doug and Louise and Jim and I, and some of the rest of you who spent quite a bit of time in our home. I was born in 1935, and the Great Depression of the country had peaked, I think, about 1929. So they were just coming out of the Depression, and people are just getting so they're on their feet somewhat. I think our family was a little lower than the average of the people in our area as far as income. But we got along, but we didn't have as much as most of our neighbors did, but it didn't, like I said, it didn't bother us much. Our house had been built by my father and grandfather and then added onto. And there were 2 bedrooms upstairs, one for my mother and father and one for the girls. And then down in the basement was the boys' bedroom, 1 room. And there, most of the time, there were 9, when I was little, there were 9 children there, plus our parents. And we didn't seem crowded to me. But when I'd gone back there 2 or 3 years ago and got permission to go in the house and go through the house and go downstairs and see the size of the house, I don't know how we lived, but we did. But like I said, it didn't seem crowded at the time, to me at least. Okay, so the reason there wasn't 10 children is because when Norman was 12 years old, he went to stay with his grandfather and grandmother Winterton. Grandpa Winterton had requested that from my mother, and she said, I'll let him go, but not till he's 12. So when he was 12, he went and lived there until he got married. Like Jim and others have said, when my father said something, you just did it. You didn't question him, you didn't ask him, you didn't wait. You did it. Now, my mother was of a different temperament. When she said to do something, you knew you had a little leeway. She was so sweet and so soft and kind-hearted. You had a little leeway, and she might tell you the second time. And once she spatted me a little bit with a piece of kindling, and I knew in her heart she was saying, "This hurts me more than it does you." And it did, because it didn't hurt me. So I'm going to get my glasses on and try and follow my notes here. Now this is where it gets a little bit sticky for some of you. I'm not calling anybody out. I'm telling you the way we lived and the way it was in our home. We did not run in the house. Nobody, no matter what age, ran in the house. My mother said, if you want to run, go outside. We did not jump or stand on the couches or the beds or any furniture. We did not climb on the table or the cupboards. My parents didn't need to tell us that. Maybe they did once. But we just, that was what happened in our home. As children, we did not interrupt adults when they were talking. Never. You never interrupted adults when they were talking. When we talked in normal voices. We did not yell like kids do now. And I think that comes from movies they've seen. It's just, you pay attention to the characters in those movies, and they're hollering and yelling so much of the time, and that's where kids get this from. So it's not all your parents' fault. I don't have this written down, so I'm going to interject it now. A few days ago, Colleen and I were talking to a car salesman in Rexburg, and he has a daughter who is grown, and she is a renowned writer. She's pretty young, but she's invited to go to England shortly, and then next year to Australia to have a get-together with elite writers in the world. That's how good she is. And we questioned him how she got to that point. And he said, when my kids were young, they did not get on the internet. He said, I told them, you either read a book or go outside and dig a hole. They did not get on the internet at all. Now that's, I know that's, I'm just throwing it out there. We never argued with each other. As children, I never heard an argument between we children. Never. We never fought with each other. We got along with each other. We respected each other. We respected each other's property, what they had. When we ate our meals, we ate everything. There was no leftovers. When my mother cooked, she knew how many she was cooking for usually if somebody else came unexpectedly. But our concern was not eating all of the food, but were we taking more than our share, and so that the rest wouldn't have their share. There weren't any leftovers. Well, what would we have done with them? We didn't have a refrigerator. We never had a refrigerator until I was early in high school. And then Vernon's father bought a refrigerator and gave it to his mother, or Vernon's father, which is my mother. That's the first refrigerator we had. So what did we do? We had an ice box. An ice box was kept on the back porch, and it was probably 6 feet high and 5 or 6 feet long, 2.5 feet deep. And the ice box was kept cool by ice. In the winter, we would go to our reservoir, us and some neighbors who didn't have a reservoir, and when the ice got as thick as it was going to get, usually about 18 inches, no, 2.5 feet, about 2.5 feet thick, why, we had an ice saw that would run it by hand and go through the ice, and you'd cut it into a long block about 12 feet long, and this wide. And then they'd hook a team up, they'd put a chain around it, and hook a team of horses on it, and pull it up out of the reservoir onto the ice, which was so solid that horses could be right there. Then they would saw it into blocks, and the blocks were about this wide, and as I said, about that long, as deep as the ice was that year. And then they would get a big wide plank and pull those blocks up onto the sleigh, which had a 2x4 around the edge of it so they wouldn't slide off going home. And you'd take them home, and the reservoir was up where it was. So it was downhill a ways to get home. And so a full load of ice would be like was mentioned earlier about logs. It would crowd the horses, and the horses, they'd have to run, they'd have to lope to keep ahead of that sleigh full of ice. So when we got it home, everybody had one. We had a sawdust bin. It was built out of boards on the north side of any building, and it was about 8 feet deep, 8 feet high, and it was full of sawdust. So they would dig down until it was just about a foot or so of sawdust, and then lay the ice blocks out with a little space between them every once in a while, then cover it over with sawdust, and then put another layer and cover that over until the sawdust bin was full of ice. And then when in the ice box on the porch, Mom would say, "You so and so, I need some ice." So you'd get the little red wagon, and you'd go out to the ice bin, and you'd uncover it down to the ice, and you'd take an axe if you had to. If you were little, you took an axe. Well, not so little you couldn't handle an axe. and you would chop a block, and you'd pull it out with an ice tongs, put it in a little red wagon, and take it in. And the ice box had metal, and I think it was tin, and I think it was in the bottom part. Is that right? The vegetables and stuff was in the top part, and the ice was in the bottom. Okay. And that would last 3 or 4 or 5 days, and then you'd do it again. And the ice would last until the latter part of the summer. Okay, that's how we kept our food. Okay, our meals. Was it last night somebody was talking about beans? Well, okay. So our meals were simple. We had a potato patch and we raised potatoes and stored them in the basement that was unfinished in a box that my father had built, and we could store potatoes in there for a long time until spring. We raised carrots in the garden, and Mom would plant turnips, and we had cabbage sometimes. And in the garden, we hardly ever had corn or tomatoes or cucumbers because they would not grow in our climate. But sometimes we'd plant them anyway, but they'd freeze. So our meals, we ate a lot of potatoes, and Mom made bread once a week, like was said.
And Mom made, when we lived in Marion, Mom made 6 loaves of bread every other day, and I know it because I either did the dishes or made the bread. And she made 6 loaves of bread every other day.
Well, where did it go? We didn't sell bread.
Well, you had 3 meals a day with bread in one hand, I heard, so.
Okay.
Over there again?
So we ate a lot of potatoes, carrots, turnips. We didn't eat a lot of meat. We never killed an animal to eat that we could sell. If one would bloat and you could get to it soon enough and get the gas out of it, sometimes you could salvage it. If it was died for some reason, it was still good to eat, why we do it, but we didn't. And my father was raised to think, and he verified it with the Doctrine and Covenants, 89th section, the Word of Wisdom, where you don't eat a lot of meat. And we never ate pork, because Brigham Young, in his discourses at one time, said, don't eat pork. And the saints said, well, what should we do with our pigs? And he says, we'll sell them to the Gentiles. That is written. So, and besides that, my father's oldest sister, Elizabeth, he said when she ate pork, she got boils. So we didn't eat a lot of pork. We didn't eat pork in our family. But my sweet mother, had been raised on pork. And one day she said, I want some pork so bad I can't understand it. So my father said, okay, go buy some. I think she went to the store and bought a package of bacon. Okay. Our Sunday meals never varied, except from winter to summer. In the summer, we had potato salad, and that had been made on Saturday, and we had a Jello salad with some carrots in it, either orange or green. And that had been made on Saturday and put in the ice box, or later when we got a refrigerator to set up for Sunday. And then Mom, every week, every Saturday, she would bake a cake. And it was applesauce cake. And it was moist, and it was heavy, and it was so good. And she would cover it with chocolate frosting. Every Sunday we had that. Now, the summer Sunday meals varied from the winter Sunday meals, and in the winter we ate beans. Every Sunday, for as long as I lived at home, we had beans on Sunday. And Mom put up a lot of tomatoes that she got from our uncle who lived in Holiday, could raise tomatoes, and so and the beans were nearly always, we call them navy beans. They're a small white bean, Once in a while we had lima beans, not very often. Once in a great while we had chili, not very often. But we'd have beans and we'd put tomatoes in the beans. And then of course we had bread. And that never varied from Sunday to Sunday, from year to year, until Edith got in to be a teenager and she studied a little bit about the word of wisdom, chocolate. And she said, we're not supposed to be eating chocolate because the analysis of chocolate shows that there's caffeine in it. And when Edith said something, you took notice. And so we went for quite a while without having chocolate frosting on our cake. But then I don't know what happened, but something changed, and we went back to having chocolate on our applesauce cake, which I was really grateful for. Okay, sometimes we had hot lunch at school, and sometimes we took our lunch. Quite often when we took our lunch, it would be mashed beans from Sunday on some bread made into a sandwich. And when I took a lunch, and it was that I knew what the lunch was, I would find a place where I wasn't around my classmates to eat my lunch because I didn't want them to see me eating bean sandwiches. Oh, what vanity kids have. We always had what we needed, except that. We always had what food we needed. None of us ever went without food or went hungry. One time I remember Mom was gonna give us lunch money for hot lunch, and there wasn't enough money for hot lunch. That's the only time I remember, only once, we didn't have hot lunch money. I tasted pop twice until I graduated from high school. Once at the Camas Valley Livestock Show, I had a part of a can of pop, no bottles, they were all bottles. I had a part of a bottle of pop, and once at the circus. Now my mother wanted good things for us. She wanted us to enjoy the finer things. So when Barnum and Bailey came to Salt Lake with their big circus, she had planned that we would go. My father went along with it, and we went to the circus, and it was big. You've seen the movie of Barnum and Bailey Circus not too long out. It was big. Elephants and trapezes and monkeys and lions and clowns, but what we hadn't accounted for, and maybe we could have helped it, I got really thirsty, and Louise got thirsty. And we were so thirsty. I was so thirsty. I was suffering. I was so thirsty. So Mom finally bought a bottle of pop, and we shared it. And that's the second time I had pop. We had very little candy. We ate almost no candy in our family. Now, once a year, my father from the Peoa store, Del Martin's Peoa store, would buy a case of figs, and he would cut or break a corner. It was bought at a wooden box. He would break a corner off so that you could get your hand in the fig box. We were allotted 6 figs per person per day. Now you didn't eat them on that day. I don't remember that you could eat ahead because that was too much. But you could save up. If you wanted to go 4 or 5 days without your 6 figs, then you could have 30 or whatever. Everybody in the family could do that. So, and often, almost always, my father would buy a box of oranges for Christmas so we could have some oranges. Okay. Our family was quite health conscious, and Uncle Joseph's family came across a health remedy that was beyond question. They found out that there was you don't even know about this. Irene, you might have heard it, but you don't know about it. So someone made them acquainted with a product, a health product called Merlick, and it came in a gallon jug. So the recipe was every person in the family with a nose dropper, well, they would pour some out into a smaller container, into a glass or something. Every person in the family with a nose dropper would put that nose dropper in there, and then in a glass of water, you would drop out as many drops, 1 drop per year, according to your age. And you drank that every day. We got down nearly to the bottom of the gallon, and we checked with Uncle Joseph, who knew the source, to get some more Merlick. And by golly, it was not available, gone off the market. All it was seawater, seaweed water. You ever hear about that, Irene? So we had no more Merlick. Every spring, all of us, the whole family, well, not the babies, but all of us would go and be inoculated for tick fever and typhoid fever. And you could have both shots at once. Sometimes, I don't know, determined that. But then there was the booster you had to go to. And the doctor would be at Oakley or wherever, and the whole family would go in the evening and put alcohol on you and shoot you a tick shot and typhoid fever in the other arm. Tick fever would hurt really bad for a while, but then it wouldn't hurt anymore. Typhoid fever shot didn't hurt as bad, but it was last 2 or 3 days. I'm half done. I just wrote this. Quite a bit has been said about, some has been said about Mom and Pa getting married. They lost their spouses between a short time of each, couple of weeks, as I recall, of each other.
Louder.
They lost their spouses, as I recall, within a couple of weeks of each other. And Father's oldest sister, Elizabeth, who had lost her husband from a horse dragging him to death. He had the halter rope wrapped around his hand. It was a colt that he was breaking. The colt got scared and ran and drug him to death. And they had one child that had died right soon after birth. So Aunt Elizabeth, when the father's wife passed away, Aunt Della, she came out because he had 3 little children, John, Irma, and Edith. And so Aunt Elizabeth stayed there and for almost until Pa married my mother. So Father was very lonely, and he wanted companionship. So a friend of his said, and in those days, dancing was the entertainment. Remember, there was no TV. I'll tell you about TV. I don't care if we get permission to tell you about TV. I was in junior high school, and we had a substitute teacher, and his name was Walter Daniels, and he loved baseball. And one day, he said, you know, there's an invention coming out. It's not here yet, but it's going to come. And it's going to be the most fantastic thing. He loved baseball. He said, what this will allow you to do is see something that is happening and you're not even there. It'll be like seeing a movie on the screen, but it's live, it's happening. So we can see the Dodgers play the Yankees. Those were his favorite teams. And I thought, that's incredible. That's not going to happen. You can't do that. Man is not smart enough to make a machine like that. But before I got out of high school, the machine TVs were available. Okay. So we had no TV. So Father he got really lonely. So this man, I'm on that. Dancing was what you did for entertainment. If you didn't know how to dance, you learned to dance, and you learned early because that was the entertainment of the communities, the ward, everybody. Weddings, not funerals, but weddings and everything was a dance. And people got pretty good at it, and you could dance for a long, long time. I'm telling you, the clock didn't matter when you were dancing. So this friend of Pa's said, I know a woman who's a widow. She's young, and I'd like you to meet her. So why don't you come to the dance? She usually comes to the dance in Camas. Why don't you come to the dance in Camas, and I'll introduce you. So my father went to the dance, and my mother was there, and they got introduced, and my father was very attracted to my mother, and I guess my mother didn't mind his company either. So they I don't know if you'd call it dating, but my father would borrow, we didn't have a car, so my father would borrow Irene's grandfather's car to go see my mother at Woodland, which was about 15 miles away. He'd visit my mother. And he got to the point that he liked her so well he wanted to marry her, but he did not dare marry her because she was sealed to another man. So he, knowing that who he married, he wanted for an eternal companion, he didn't marry her. But one day, he was hauling dirt with his team in the wagon. He was alone. And he was in Elmer Olson's meadow, just east of the highway that goes from Marion to Camas. And he told me, and I told others as well, I'm sure, he said something came to his mind, and it was as though a voice were speaking to him. I don't think it was a voice. He didn't let on to me it was a voice. But something came to his mind. It was as strong as a voice telling him, go ahead, it will be all right. But he always, the rest of his life, worried. Well, he didn't worry. He knew that he would not have my mother in eternity. And it was a big concern to him and a cause of great sorrow. Now, when I got to understand it, it didn't bother me as bad. But you got to remember now, see, me and Louise and Doug and Jim are not sealed to our Father. We're not. We're not Andruses by patriarchal order. In the next life, we're Wintertons, which might be as good or bad. I don't know. But how can Wintertons be us here? I'm speaking back a generation or two, Vernon, not current. Don't misunderstand me, Vernon.
That's okay. You just keep on.
Okay. So when I got to understand the situation, it didn't bother me because I thought, well, I'll be grown up. I'll have a wife, hopefully, and we'll be a pair, and everybody will have a spouse. So it won't be like a mother and father and a group of kids. So it hasn't bothered me as much as it did my father. And I know my mother greatly loved her first husband, Harold Winterton. His father wrote a history about him somewhat that I've read, and he was the bishop, I think, when he was killed, and he was a good man, a good man. And my mother never talked much about him. She was married to my father, and they were devoted to each other. They loved each other. They were sweet with each other. I only heard them have a dissenting discussion 3 times in my life. It didn't get wild, it didn't get mean, but they felt differently about an issue, and there was a discussion. I only heard that 3 times. Okay. as I said, Mom wanted us to have the finer things of life, and so we had a Jeep for a car that we thought we could use for a car as well as a tractor, which we did on the farm. So she would take some of us, me and Louise, and a neighbor girl, a Weller girl, over to, this is, I think, only 1 year, we're supposed to learn to swim in a year, over to Heber, Midway, to Schneider's Hot Pots to learn to swim. And she wanted us to learn to swim. And then, as I said, we went to 2 circuses. We went to the circus in Salt Lake, Farm and Bailey, and then we went to a fake circus in Camas. It was just a money-raising gimmick. It wasn't a circus at all. And the other occasion that we went to that my mother felt we should go to was the Days of 47 parade in Salt Lake City. 1947, when I was 12 years old, and that was the parade. That was the 100 years celebration of the pioneers coming to the valley. So the parade was in the morning. Then the schedule was to go to Lagoon with your own lunch and play softball. And so we went, and we had a good seat standing by the curb, watching the parade, and all the floats, and it was a big parade. President McKay was president of the church at that time, and there were some queens in the parade on a float, and they were in bathing suits. And one of the other leaders of the church, I don't know who, and it doesn't even matter, looked at these beautiful girls on this float in their bathing suits, and he thought, for a church parade, that's not appropriate. So he went and complained to President McKay. And President McKay smiled at him and he said, "Weren't they lovely though?" That's all it said. I think Jim mentioned that, before that, we had 2 bicycles in the family, boys' bicycle and another boy's bicycle, wasn't it? Were they both white? One was for the girls and one was for the boys. And when we go around to play with our neighbor kids, which would be the farthest 2 miles, half a mile to 2 miles away, we take a bicycle. My father, like Jim said, like I said before, he said, he thought that Sunday afternoons between Sunday school and the sacrament meeting, which started at 7:30 at night, was a time that you should observe the Sabbath. But we didn't play with our neighbor friends on Saturdays because we worked and they worked. So the only time we had to play was Sunday afternoon. And we took turns going at each other's place. And we always got permission to go. And my father didn't really like us to go, as Jim said. He thought that was really not the appropriate way to spend the Sabbath. But he did not deny us. He didn't deny us. Once in a while. Now you think we could only play in the summer, but that's not true. We could ice skate on Weller's Reservoir if we shoveled the snow off. One fall, it froze really hard before the snow came, and we had glass to skate on. And we skied. We had the old skis. There was a piece of wood, ash or pine, and it had, right at the center of the ski, it was thicker than at the back or the front. And through that thick part was drilled a hole, and the hole was not round, it was that wide when it went through the ski, and you put a piece of leather through that with a buckle on it, and you put your overshoe in that, and that kept the ski on until you went uphill. When you went uphill, your foot would slide out of the ski. So we were very ingenious. So, and I don't know who in my family figured it out. I don't think it was me. I like to cook. It wasn't me. That you could take a piece of inner tube, cut it in a strip that wide and that long, tie it in a string around it, and put it through that same slot that the leather went through, and bring it around behind your overshoe. That way, I don't want to take the credit, but
It was genius. It was one of the best things that ever happened to us, and it worked.
I wanted somebody to say that. I don't know. I think Louise was right. But see, they were smart enough to know I had a good thing. They didn't. Okay. Our father never hit any of us, ever, except that I know of, except on one occasion, me. My mother was not home. Father was out butchering a mutton that he often did to sell to the grocery store or to neighbors. And Irma was in the house, and she wanted me to take our horse Bud and deliver some music or something to Virginia Russell that lived 2.5 miles away. And I didn't immediately do it, and I really thought, I don't know what I thought. I was too young to even think, I guess. But I didn't do it. So she came out to my father and told him that she told me to do it, and I disobeyed. And he stopped butchering the mutton, and there was a little piece of board there, and he grabbed me and he hit me on the rear end a few times with it. And I don't remember it hurting me at all physically. And he said, go catch the horse and do what you're told. And the horse was Bud, and he was out south of the house in what we called the quackgrass field with 2 or 3 other horses, and he was hard to catch. And to make it so we could catch him, we had a strap we put around one of his front legs with a chain about that long, and when he had that chain on, he couldn't run. He could only walk, so he could catch him. But he did not have the chain on this occasion. So I took a halter and I went out and I chased and I chased and I chased and I chased, and I couldn't catch him. And finally somebody came to my rescue, and I didn't have to go to Virginia Russell's with the stuff. I don't know why, it was too late in the day, I don't know. So that late afternoon, my father went 1 mile down to the highway to Wilmer Hoyt's to get some grain seed. I love to go with my father. I always, when I could, I went with my father. I love to be with him. I love to do the things he did. And when you stop and talk to somebody, I just loved their conversation. I was always with my father when I could. And I don't know if I didn't want to go on this occasion he made me or not, probably. We went on a wagon, a flatbed, team of horses, and he was up in the front driving, and I got on the very back of the wagon. And we went the mile down to Wilmer Hoyt's, got the grain seed, started home. I was on the back of the wagon. I was not going to get close to him. And not for fear, but I really didn't think I deserved what I got. But I was hurt anyway. And he said to me, come up here by me. So I did. He put his arm around me, made me sit by him. He never said a word. But I could tell he was hurting inside terribly. I was not afraid of my father, and like was said earlier, I guess by Jim, if right was right and wrong was wrong, and you didn't cross the line. If you crossed the line, I don't know what happened except you didn't cross the line with my father. You knew that when he said something, that's what he meant. If he would, like, I don't know what he'd do today when he sees kids that don't mind their parents, don't pay any attention to them. But we all did. I lied to my father twice. Can you imagine that?
No.
I did, though. Twice I lied to him. Once he said to me, "Don't you like to work?" And I lied and I said I did. On another occasion, he said, "Do you eat to live or live to eat?" And I said, "I eat to live." I knew that was the wrong answer. Not only the wrong answer, it was a lie. We had to stay out of school a lot to herd sheep or haul rocks. When I was in the 6th grade, I stayed out 1/6 of the time. When it came to the end of the year, I stayed out a 6th. Father logged quite a bit and went with other neighbors up logging up Hoyt's Canyon above our place. And he would take the logs down to Sorensen's in Oakley and get paid, and that's what he would pay the grocery bill with that we accumulated at Hoyt's store in Camas. Now, when Mom went grocery shopping for the family, there was not such a thing as grocery carts. When she went shopping, she came home with a couple of paper bags, and that was groceries for a week or so. We mostly ate things that we grew. Our neighbors lived where Wellers do and John Singer does, about a quarter of a mile north of us. And Wellers had come from Germany just before World War II. Mr. Weller was a member of the church, and all his family were members, and they got out of Germany just before the World War. And he had a store, a mattress store and a bookstore. No, he had a bookstore and worked for a mattress person in Salt Lake Valley. And he bought my uncle's place, Uncle Willard's place, which is where Willers are now. And the reason was, he said that he could sleep better up in Marion because it was cooler, and it was much cooler. Cooler in the winter too. He could sleep cooler in the summer. And he had a nice Buick green car. Nice car, and he went nearly every day to Salt Lake in this nice car. And our house was right on a bend, right on the corner of the gravel road. And when Mr. Weller came home, well, I guess both ways, he would spin gravel and throw gravel all over. And on numerous occasions, I think you guys are going to sleep.
No,
I don't have much more.
we're just comfortable, but we love what we're hearing.
Okay, just so you're not bored. So I heard on more than probably 4 or 5 occasions from adults that something needed to be done to Mr. Weller to slow him down on that corner, and nothing was done. And I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I was not yet in kindergarten, and I know that because Bob Taylor lived down across from the cemetery where John and Margie later lived. I went and got Bob Taylor, and I said, "Bob, will you help me?" And he said, "Oh, what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I've got to do something to stop Mr. Weller. Nobody's doing anything about it, so I guess I'll have to do it myself." So my father had dumped several loads of rocks between the cemetery and our house on the side of the road, and that And it became convenient when they widened the road. It had a rock base, lots of loads of rocks. So about halfway between the cemetery and home, I got Bob Taylor to help me, and we got from these rocks that my father had unloaded there, the biggest rocks we could carry, and we lined them clear across the road. Clear across. We thought, Mr. Weller, you've got to slow down now. And I was really quite proud that I had come up with a plan and actually did something to do what everybody said should be done, slow Mr. Weller down. Okay, I guess my mother...
Bob Taylor.
He was,
Was he another child?
Jim, who was Bob Taylor?
How old?
How old?
He was just my same age.
Okay.
And he left before I was in kindergarten, so that tells you how old I was. And so he'd already gone. He was still there. But when I was in kindergarten, he'd already moved. Okay, so that night when I got home, what do you think happened? My mother had seen this probably out the kitchen window. So she told my father. I did not have to pick up the rocks. I don't know who picked up the rocks or who got them out of there, but it was not me. I don't think it was Bob Taylor. So my father said, come with me, and we went into his bedroom. And he explained to me the gravity of my sin. And so we kneeled down by his bed, and he prayed that I would be forgiven. Then I was to pray and ask that I would be forgiven and not do something like that ever again. Which happened. I mean, the prayer. I prayed. But my heart was not in it. Because I thought, why do I have to repent of something that I've heard all of you adults talk about that needed to be done, and I'm the only one that did it? So what is wrong with that? That happened.
Did you ever find out what he thought was so wrong about it?
I never discussed it with him and talked about it, and he never mentioned it ever again.
Did it slow Mr. Weller down?
Say that again.
Did it slow Mr. Weller down?
I don't know who moved the rocks, but I think they were moved before Mr. Weller came from Salt Lake. It would have slowed anybody down. I can remember Pearl Harbor. I was 6 years old when Pearl Harbor happened. I can tell you the details about it. And at first, people like John, who were needed on the farms and ranches, were not drafted, but the draft board in each county had a quota they had to make. And they kept drafting and drafting and drafting, and the war lasted for 4 or 5 years. We were not in it quite. We were in it for 4 years. So I know you guys are getting. I'm not even going to tell you about that, but I was 6 years old when that happened. We didn't know about it until we went to church. When we went to church, we heard about it, and when we came home and discussed it as a family, I was so scared because nobody knew what the Japanese were going to do. There was talk that they had submarines off the coast of San Francisco and were going to come into California, invade, and possibly come inland. And it just scared and petrified me. And would my father and John both be called to war and be killed? And John finally was drafted in the Navy and served there about a year before the war was over. When John had to go and report, the tradition was in our stake, in our community, to have a farewell party for those who were reporting. And I'll tell you, I wish you could all sit through one of those as I did that night. that was so somber and so impressive. And I knew most, there was maybe 20, maybe 15, probably 15 were drafted in that draft and had to report to Fort Douglas for duty. And as their names were, the state president was on the stand, and we had a program. The best singer in the valley, who was about 20 years old, a beautiful woman, sang Thura Lura Lura. And that's where I learned to love that song. So as each person who's drafted, name was called, they would walk from the audience and walk up and sit on the stand. And I knew nearly all of them in the valley, and I would think, will I ever see him again? Will he be killed? And I lost two of my cousins in the war. Irene's uncle Millard, her father's brother Millard, died from pneumonia in the war, and one of the Jensen triplets, Willis, was killed in Germany, shot in Germany and killed, and then his body didn't come home. I debate here now whether to tell these things or not. Well, I'm going to tell this. The church house was 1.5 miles away, and in the summer you had to get your own way to church. You could ride a horse or walk. And we went to primary in that late afternoon, and a friend of mine, Dale Taylor, that lived later where Bob Taylor lived, across from the cemetery, and I were at primary, and we walked home. And we probably stopped in the gravel pit to mess around, and there was a nice swimming hole in the gravel pit. We might have gone for a swim, I don't know, we could have. But we spent quite a bit of time there. And then as we came across the big canal bridge, they had just built it, and they had dropped a lot of nails down, and they'd not gone down to get them. The nails, some of them were bent, some of them were straight. So I found a bag, spent a lot of...
The canal was dry?
Yeah. Spent a lot of time gathering up nails. When I got home, it had been a long time since primary was over, and my father said, I don't think he asked me what I'd been doing, but he said, go in the house and go to bed. So I did. I went in the house, went downstairs, got in bed, and it was probably now about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I laid in bed for 2 weeks, not 2 hours. I think it was about 2 hours. Now, I wasn't about to get up and say anything to my father. I did not dare get out of bed. I laid in that bed. I didn't sleep for at least 2 hours. And finally, my father came and said, you can get out of bed now. That's all there was to that. Okay. As I said, dancing was the form of entertainment. When Irene's Aunt Ruth, who was older than me, was married to Elmer Bowie, they were married, and then a dance was held in the Marian church house, which had chairs for, it had been a schoolhouse, then converted to a church house when they consolidated the schools. And the floor could be cleared with these chairs and the dance. The chairs were set all the way around the outside. Now I've got to think a minute here. I don't think there's anybody here that could be offended by this story. I'm sure there's not. Okay, otherwise I wouldn't say it. So we were having the dance, and my father's oldest brother, Milo Andrus, was there. And he lived in the Marian community for a while, but now is living back in Holiday. And he was witty. He was sharp, and he was relentless, and he was not always accommodating to your feelings.
but he was Uncle Milo. There was nobody like Uncle Milo. And he used a cane. And I could tell you why he used a cane, but I'm not going to now. You ask me later if you want to. So Miriam Weller was 3 years older than me. And the Weller kids often would come to a wedding because the people would invite brother and sister Weller. And they didn't go out much to weddings, but the kids would come and they'd say, Mother and Dad said we could come and bring the gift. So Miriam was there, and her skin was nice and tan. And she was a good-looking girl, about 16. Yeah, she'd be. No, she wouldn't be that. She didn't have that much sense. She was about 14. And all the chairs were taken almost all the way around the cultural hall. And she came, and and she wanted a place to sit. So she sat by Uncle Milo. And Uncle Milo looked at her, and she had a halter on for a pinafore or a halter, just straps over her shoulders. And that was not appropriate in Uncle Milo's day. So he looked at her and he turned to her and he said, where do you live? Wanting to make an acquaintance because he knew most of the people in the valley. He would have known her family, but he didn't because they moved in way later. And she said, in a house. He said, where do you live? She said, in a house. And you couldn't get Uncle Milo. He said, oh, well, I thought people that were dressed like you are lived in teepees. Miriam got up and found another place to sit. I think I'm getting to the end. I know you're... I think I had the ideal childhood. We loved each other. My mother and father ruled with gentleness. Firmness, but gentleness. We loved each other. And I don't know, like Jim said, I don't know. At the time, once I wanted to run away because I think of some families whose kids had this and that and we didn't have. And I thought it'd be nice to be their kid. I thought of that once quite strongly. Never tried it. But later when I got some sense, I realized that we did have the ideal childhood and upbringing. We had the ideal parents. And I'm so grateful for their sacrifices. That's one thing out of here. My mother would read to us in the evening. She'd say, now you go get in bed and I'll stop what I'm doing here and I'll come read to you. So we would read, she would read to us as little kids, and she read Harry Potter. She read Star Wars. Not even. She read I've got it written down. Why is it not here? Oh, I got another page. No, it's not. Okay. She read Black Beauty, Smokey, Call of the Wild, The Indian White Boy, The Bobbsey Twins, and there was about 5 or 6 of those Bobbsey Twins books. The Chinese twins, the Bobbsey twins, the Eskimo twins, and all of those, as well as pioneer stories. And then Mom she'd be reading and she'd go to sleep. Then we would go to sleep. She'd wake up and go back to her ironing or whatever she was doing. But she was an angel. And our father was so respected by everyone. He knew horses. Horses responded to him, and I loved horses. It was we just had the ideal situation in our family. I'm so grateful, and I hope I hope you get a glimpse somehow, some way, of what our family was like, the tradition that you have inherited, and I hope that it impresses you to the degree that you will make up your mind to, when there's a choice, choose right. Always choose right. And be a follower of Jesus Christ. Because what other way is it? Or if you follow the alternative, you know the consequence. So thank you, and it's up to Doug if I can entertain questions or not.
Any questions for me, for him, any of us?
If you have any questions for any of us, or we would have a little time if anybody here has a comment or memory. But we're running out of time almost, so if you have questions or comments, make it brief, but you're welcome to come share.
You're wrapped around this.
Yes, I mean, exactly. Well, everyone knows Irene, our cousin, Ross's daughter.
Well, that was so very good. I don't want to make this too silly, but I'm going to tell you why it's complicated that I am cousin. So Ivan Andrus, their father, had an older brother, Joseph Andrus, that they refer to as Uncle Joseph, who was my grandfather. And so my father, Roscoe, and these guys were first cousins. But he was double first cousins with John and Irma and Edith, because their mother, Della, was a sister to my grandmother, Harriet. So two brothers, Joseph and Milo Andrus, married two Stevenson sisters. And that made my father double cousins. And so, because they grew up in Marion, and my family were the last of my grandfather's family to still be in Marion, these people were my big brothers and sisters. I'm the oldest of 8, and Louise was my big sister growing up. She used to drive me to band. We were coming home one night from a practice, and it's the first time I'd ever seen the northern lights coming out of Camas, and the sky went all green, and we pulled over by the side of the road and got out to watch. My sister, Carol, in the blue shirt, and my brother, Millard, in the tan shirt, and my sister, Marlene, over there in the red shirt, we all well, when Ken said we were a great family, we felt like we were part of the family too. It was one big Andrus family there in Marion that grew up together. At one time, I think it was after your mission, is that when you were breaking sand? Ken lived in my parents' home. Everybody else had gone to Idaho, and he stayed with us for a summer and was breaking a horse. And so he was upstairs in the boys' room, and we would all hang around on the boys' beds at night and tell stories and listen to him tell stories. Good times. I would also say that their mother, my Aunt Susie, definitely was an angel. We knew that too. At one time, and I don't remember why, I slept overnight up there, being babysat in your parents' home. And I was homesick, a mile away, you know, homesick. But anyway, Aunt Susie was so very sweet to me. Okay? So let's see. second cousins with Anita.
Any other questions or comments?
I think Jim would argue with Ken about no fighting.
Ken said there was no fighting, but he left before Jim and I got old enough to, let him have the memories he's got.
We have a question.
Well, when our dad got tied up by you guys, wasn't that argument? My dad was always a teasing person.
Louise is gonna tell that one.
Ken said there was no fighting, and I think he's pretty much right, but, this is a little pre-story for the question you had. I used to wear a pair of, bib overalls. I used to wear a pair of bib overalls called Big Mac, and Harold called me Big Muck. And that term meant manure. And Harold was kind of a tease, and one time after school, I don't know what he did to me, but I felt sorry for myself, and I started to bawl. And I went into my bedroom and was bawling, and I kept bawling, and Harold had gone outside, and Mom was in the living room, and I almost ran out of energy to keep bawling. Finally, Mom said, "Louise, be quiet." I was so relieved that I could. So, Harold was such a tease, and I don't know what prompted it that day, but Ken and Dale Taylor got Harold and got him down. Now, I probably thought that I was a help, I don't know, but they got him down and tied him, tied his legs and tied his hands like we used to see in the cowboy movies. And left him. The only adult that was home was Edith. And I was so thrilled that Ken and Dale Taylor got Harold tied down. But then we got scared, so we ran to Weller's Grove to hide out. But I think we came back home before our parents got home, and Harold was untied. I guess he'd wiggled out of it, and I never heard any more about it. Do you remember it? Do you remember doing that?
Not as good as you.
Want their version now.
I just know he got tied up.
Ken was describing harvesting ice from the reservoir. If you folks see the movie Ice, at the very beginning of the movie, there's a song and there's people harvesting ice, and it was a lot like that.
I didn't mention that I fell in the reservoir.
Yeah, the
Got me
movie
out
Frozen.
before I froze to death, but they got me home before too long.
The name of the movie is Frozen.
Oh. The name of the movie is Frozen, not Ice, sorry. Thank you.
We always had family prayer in our home, and one of the very first things I remember about family prayer when I was young was we prayed for Harold, because he was a missionary, and then he was in the army, and when I really remember it was, he was in Korea, and my father prayed so fervently that Harold's life would be preserved and that he would come home.
Want me to say a little bit about the Korean service? Most
most everyone, not everyone was drafted in the Korean War when we were involved in it, and Harold was the right age. But Harold was the right age to be drafted. And he was in California, and it was in the winter time. And in those days, if you wanted to communicate, you did it through telegraph. And the telegraph office was in Park City, which was 20 miles away. So they would telegram. So when they received the telegram in Park City, they would call them the receiver of the telegram on the telephone. So one morning, we got a call, and it said, Harold D. Winterton is in the hospital at Camp Roberts, California, with meningitis. Recovery at this time is questionable. So, my mother, I don't know who else we called, but she called Grandpa Winterton, who was Harold's grandfather. Grandpa Winterton called back in a few minutes or a short time, and he said, Susie, I think we need to get down there. So he bought tickets. We were snowed in. He said, I'll meet you down at the bottom of your lane in such and such a time. So my father and John took the team and sleigh and took Mom down and met Grandpa Winterton. They went to Salt Lake, bought a ticket, flew to California, and when they got there, Harold was sick. And